Welcome to this episode of Guftagu. My name is Ejaz Haider. The public version of Pakistan's first comprehensive national security policy was released on 14th January 2022 by then Prime Minister Imran Khan. The policy drew on inputs from various quarters and the process took more than a year, though it also incorporated elements from previous attempts to formulate such a policy, which unfortunately had never reached fruition. The policy prioritized economic and human security as core elements of national security. The term used was cooperative geoeconomics, contrasting the hard security approach of geopolitics with cooperation, trade, and connectivity. The policy's lifespan was for 4 years, after which it was to be revisited in accordance with internal, regional, and global developments. That's going to be 2026. We don't know whether the current government has started any work on revising it, but 2026 is when the first policy has to be revised. The person at the time who headed this effort was Dr. Moeed Yusuf, and he was then Pakistan's national security advisor. Later, as a private citizen and scholar, and he's currently the president of Beacon House National University, he wrote a paper titled Pakistan's Geoeconomic Pivot Strategies, Opportunities, and Challenges. That report sought to unpack the concept of geoeconomics in Pakistan's context. Now, this is important because the term, as it originated in the United States, has a different kind of Hobbesian connotations. Given the fast changing geopolitical scene, especially since the election of Donald Trump as the President of the United States, Yusuf followed up the previous report with a recent one titled Going Against the Grain, Implementing Pakistan's Geoeconomic Pivot Amidst Geopolitical Chaos. Quite a mouthful, this title. This report revisits the concept of cooperative geoeconomics pivot in the light of global and regional environment and the changes this context may necessitate. Now, I have already spoken with Dr. Moeed Yusuf about this, and we did two programs with him. But I need to take the show to other scholars to see what they have to say about the concept and the paper under discussion. So, for this episode, I have with me Dr. Huma Baqai. Dr. Baqai is a professor at Millennium Institute of Technology and Entrepreneurship, is also the author of 3 books, and is a foreign policy expert. So, thank you for being on this episode, Dr. Baqai. I know you were part of that effort. You saw the evolution of the original report back in 21, 22. And you have also read this recent paper, which is under discussion. So I want to get your first impressions about the paper and the report and how this vision can be implemented, if at all, and then we can proceed from there.
To be candid on this, this is not it's not a fancy document. It's not a fancy report. It is minus a lot of frills that could have been added. So the report is not out there to impress anyone. In fact, I see the report as an SOS from a person who put in a lot of effort and was also committed to this whole concept of pivoting from geopolitics to geoeconomics. Why I think this report becomes more pertinent in today's day and time is that after what happened between India and Pakistan in May, the arrogance of the Pakistan security state, so to say, has really gone up, which can actually cloud the desire to pivot to geoeconomics, which is where your real survival lies. So this document, the best thing that I liked about this document was the fact that it is operational. It is not long on talk. It is long on what can be done. It talks about exports. It talks about human resource. It talks about how policies, at least in this part of the world and perhaps also in Pakistan, don't die of rejection. They die of neglect.
Okay, so let me ask you this. The original report and now the subsequent 2 papers that Moeed has written in trying to sort of, these are like explainers about what exactly the then government wanted to do and why it was important to pivot from hard security to a citizen-centric approach, trade, economics, connectivity, and the rest of it. So in terms of a blueprint, it's perfectly fine. But then this blueprint has to unfold or implemented, if you will, in the real world. And in the real world, as you know, and Moeed himself has conceded this, that we don't have connectivity in the East because there is a certain kind of geopolitical environment there. We now also have this problem in the West with Afghanistan, as both of us know. For the last almost 3 weeks now, the borders are closed. And the government has said that they will remain closed up until the Taliban government in Afghanistan agrees to do certain things. Now, given this, the real world issue, and I'm kind of keeping away from the rest of it. We'll come to that with Trump and how the global geopolitics is playing out. But if connectivity and if the citizen centric approach is the stuff that this policy is made of, how do you implement it in this environment, in this ecosystem?
I think the first and foremost thing that needs to be done is ownership. I see no ownership for this document. I see no ownership for this policy. And that is probably how Pakistan works, that we choose to abandon even good things with bad governments. I mean, maybe Imran Khan's government was bad and maybe he blundered. But if there's something that can come out of this good initiative, should we own it and take it forward, or we should just reject it and abandon it because it was initiated by him?
Okay.
Rename, retitle it. For example, you see the Benazir Income Support Program. I was also a very, very small part of it. And I know when they did it in Punjab, they would tear off the Benazir Income Support Program from the top of the form, but still use it. And then now later on, it got adopted by international organizations. So I personally think, as a scholar, as an objective reviewer of it, that it is a good document. It is soft, it is easy to implement, and identifies doables that are not pie in the sky. And
So, so,
I would go
so
about,
sorry,
yes.
just a clarification. So you're saying that in addition to the ecosystem in which this policy needs to be implemented, the other big problem is that the current dispensation does not even own it. And
I think they don't own it, they don't talk about
I
it.
mean, people keep
So,
talking about it,
I mean,
NSP,
it's
NSP,
people
but
like you and me who talk about it, or a German foundation that sponsored this report,
yeah.
who are probably committed to this economic connectivity in the region. And when it comes from Europe, you understand it more. They have a good example to set and they want to cherish that, although they're also struggling. But having said this, this is something I've said earlier. This is something I'm going to say again. For connectivity to work, one, Pakistan should realize that it is its survival strategy. It's not doing
Okay.
it for others, it's doing it for itself. And two, it's not about having good relations. It is about having functional relations. And
Okay.
Moed in this particular report has talked about minus India and
Yeah.
move on despite India, because India is not coming on board. With Modi winning the Bihar elections, it becomes more remote. But I personally think that we should continue to pitch for functional relations, because if you look at the
Hmm.
stats tell us that despite the rhetoric, we continue to trade with India. Despite the rhetoric from the Afghan government,
Yeah.
they will have to come back to Pakistan. The tyranny of geography will dictate that.
Absolutely. I mean, I love this. I mean, this is a term that I've been talking about for God knows how long, the tyranny of geography. But here's the thing. It's very interesting what you said, so I just want to kind of explore this further. Uh, when you say some kind of functional relationship, and you're absolutely right that where there is a seller and a buyer, trade will happen. And it may not be dyadic trade, but it'll happen through third and fourth parties, which is exactly what's happening. So, are you suggesting that perhaps Pakistan can unilaterally reach out to India and say that, while everything else is what it is, let's trade in terms of connectivity. Let's do certain things. Uh,
Absolutely not.
so you
I
you
may
saying
use that term.
So you're saying we should do that?
No, I'm saying no, we should not. I'm
Oh,
not saying
we should not. Sorry.
Pakistan. I said no, Pakistan should not approach India unilaterally. What
Okay.
I'm saying is that, but perhaps is also there that we keep dialogue on the table,
Okay.
where we keep our defensive, sort of offensive also on the table.
No, okay. I'm just trying to understand this. So this particular Indian government has a very clear, overt, and expressed policy of not engaging Pakistan, cutting Pakistan loose. Now, how do we keep the option of dialogue on the table if we are also not going to take a proactive, functional approach? And I'm using your term. Uh, as a matter of fact, we can even use the theoretical framework of functionalism, if, in terms of IR, and say that, and that, the functionalist framework is, as both of us know, is not state centric. It's a more technical way of dealing with things. So how do we keep the dialogue on the table if India is not prepared to talk to us, and you have already said an emphatic no to a unilateral outreach to India? So how do we keep dialogue
It's
on the table?
fairly simple. China is already pitching out soccer.
Okay.
China is already pitching an alternative to SARC.
Okay.
Pakistan is already emerging as a very important country of the global south.
Okay.
The global south is gaining momentum. It is today and tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So it is about creating a pitch where India can't refuse to play. Essentially that. But for that, before we move on to functional relations with India, far more critical is having better relations or functional relations with Afghanistan,
Yeah.
which perhaps
That,
now is
that's
more of
another
a
problem.
problem. And India has done what it has done this very cleverly. So the eastern border is quiet, but it is
Yeah.
the western border which is pricking Pakistan.
Yeah.
And
So
Pakistan will,
there
and
too,
by
we
the
have
way,
certain
one more
structural
word,
problems.
Ijaz,
Hmm.
force is not the only option to deal with Afghans. And I know there is arrogance
I
on the
agree.
Afghan side.
I agree with you. I mean, you see, unfortunately, now we have two binaries. One argument is that we can talk ourselves out of this problem. The other option is that we can war ourselves out of this problem. And I think these two extremes are not particularly helpful in the current situation. And we've got to find out some other way of dealing with this. But it is a wicked problem, and it has its own structural issues. And I think, from where I stand, I think our policy of strategic patience or restraint, if you will, uh, has basically snapped, and we decided that no, enough is enough, and now we have to do something. The problem where I agree with you is that in now deciding to do this, there is a chance that we might just drop other options and just focus on this. So, but what we have discussed, and this is not the crux of our discussion, but obviously this has to come in terms of how the policy can be implemented, if at all, whether we have the ecosystem. Now, you talked about Global South. Uh, can we use Global South as a collective noun? I mean, from where I stand, I don't think we can, because the term itself, Global South, is more about historical power structures and relations of countries that were colonized and the countries that colonized them. So global north and global south. But global south is not a monolith. I mean, we have various dyads in global south that are inimical to each other. So how do we utilize this idea of global south in order to do what this policy wants us to do?
Don't use global south. Use moving of the fulcrum from the west to the east.
Okay.
Talk about China leading the world economically.
Okay.
Talk about the assertive Russia, which, despite all its problems, continues to provoke the West and is
So,
talking on its own
okay,
terms.
I get what you're saying. So you're saying that within the region, given the ecosystem, the possibility of land connectivity is now slim to whatever,
No,
nil perhaps.
interestingly, in the
But we
last,
still have
yeah,
connectivity among economies, like
yes,
China and Pakistan has that. Uh, China is also reaching out to Bangladesh. Bangladesh has reached out to us, and we are reaching out to Bangladesh. So there was some months ago a discussion of sorts in the Pakistani media about whether there can be a SARC,
yes, start comprehensive.
saw India, with China as the lead player. I don't think that debate went anywhere in any particular direction, but I just want to get your take on that because, in terms of connectivity, do you think that's an idea that needs to be explored?
I think 2025, despite its challenges, has been a good year for Pakistan. Pakistan
Okay.
has made some tremendous gains on the diplomatic front.
Hmm.
Pakistan has actually succeeded in changing the power matrix of South Asia. And in some
Hmm.
ways, Pakistan is back in the game. But this back in the game is not sustainable unless it is backed by by an economy that at least does not force Pakistan to make compromises that are not good for it. That is
Okay.
my trust. So so we're so proud of our nuclear program. Even the sustainability of that nuclear program, and despite and I've worked with them also, I know that they've strengthened it and it's duly protected, but and it is very difficult to roll it back. It's not
Well,
happening. Despite that, I think Pakistan needs to strengthen its economic front. Wars in today's world are not fought on conventional fronts, but we fought a conventional war and we won. But now we need to move on to the diplomatic front. We've done well there. Now we need to move on the economic front. We've even won, in some ways, made some gains on the narrative front. So I think economy is the only front where Pakistan is lagging behind and is forced to make compromises that will come back to bite us. So this is not about Moe, this is not about Imran Khan, this is not about a certain government. It is about the survival of Pakistan. It is about the changing global dynamics where we say that the where we say that economic diplomacy is the grammar of power politics. How can Pakistan choose to stay out of it if it wants to consolidate what it has acquired so far? That is my thrust.
okay, all this is very good and well said, but there are real problems here. For instance, we are not standard setters, we are standard takers. Our manufacturing sector uh, has been badly mauled for various reasons over the last 3 decades. Uh, During Musharraf's time, the little bit of revival of the economy was more because of the inflows that were coming in and in the services sector, but manufacturing suffered a lot. And in any case, we hardly do value added at a high level, and we now have competitors within the region. So how do we revive that? That's one obvious question. Do we need to have an industrial policy? Do we need to actually identify certain sectors where the government can facilitate? One of the things that Moeed wrote about is like export of human resource, not just blue collar workers, but white collar human resource, by identifying countries with aging populations, and then creating that kind of stream, and the revenues that you get in terms of remittances and all of that. So it's one of those areas. Are there any other areas that you can think of which can be identified and where those sectors can be facilitated?
I think also how from consumerism to export-led growths. Right now,
Yeah,
our
okay.
imports have gone up, and they've not gone up because we're importing machinery. They've gone up because we
Mhm.
import consumer goods, and we remain focused on that.
Yeah,
Because actually, there's this just lack of commitment and direction. Every time something new happens for Pakistan, they call it their silver bullet. So China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is still a great initiative, was our silver bullet. Nowadays, you're talking about this mineral diplomacy with the United States, which is going to turn our fate around. Nobody is going to turn our fate around till we turn it around. And that is why I
yeah.
like this document. I like this document because it talks about trilateral arrangements between Pakistan, Bangladesh, and China. We
Mhm.
could have more trilateral arrangements, uh, an understanding that to connect with Central Asia and all these visits to Central Asia are pointless unless we have better relations with Afghanistan, or functional relations, like the term I use, to understand and learn from Indian pragmatism of how they invested in a government in Afghanistan, and in 3 months they were improving their relations with the next one. And despite internal
Okay.
criticism, invited the Taliban to the Deobandi centers in India. I think that is the kind of pragmatism Pakistan needs to look at. And also, it is fantastic to become a part of the stabilizing force in Palestine. But at the same time, that is not the only revenue generation construct. Making
Yeah,
money through
okay. I mean,
security is good.
when
I
it
don't know if
comes
you can run this,
when
but seriously.
when it comes to
Mhm.
pragmatism, when
Ji.
it comes to pragmatism, we are pretty good at being transactional. I think one of the reasons we've kind of hit it off with Trump is because, you know, transactional versus transactional kind of,
But this is
instead
also,
of
I call it the I
it
call it the
seems to
Trump
be attractive
mode.
rather than repelling
Yes.
each other.
But this is the
But
Trump
one
mode.
final.
You can't invest in Trump's transactionalism for Pakistan's growth, for Pakistan's tomorrow. Even US is not sure what to do with
Okay.
that man.
So I mean, I frankly, I mean, my personal view of how 2025 has unfolded is that it's more a matter of serendipity rather than any structural thinking or approaches on our part. But nonetheless, it's good to have something good rather than not to have it at all. But one final question before we wrap this up. So, geopolitics is unfolding in a strange kind of way. We're talking about multipolarity. Multipolarity obviously is offers opportunities, but also has terrible challenges. There's a lot of instability. You can have regional power centers emerging, and then given the histories of enmity among various dyads, chances of a war breaking out among and between them obviously goes up. So, in this kind of environment where you have now these trading blocks, the neoliberal trading order is basically, I don't know, I mean, it hasn't died, it's almost dying. Uh, so, within this larger global ecosystem, how do we actualize this idea of cooperative geoeconomics?
Really, I think it's easier now. I think it's fairly simple.
Okay.
Geopolitics is not going anywhere, but geoeconomics is in for good. And Pakistan, because
Okay.
Pakistan's geography has sometimes been called a baggage, at other times, Pakistan has used it to its advantage. But essentially, Pakistan's geography allows it to emerge as a corridor state. And
Mm-hmm.
Pakistan is not invested in that. It talks about it, it needs to walk its talk. I mean, even today, when we talk about balancing our relations between Beijing and Washington, the obvious bias and tilt towards Washington is clear. And I personally think that if if uh, if we need to pivot to being not a proxy state, but a
Mm-hmm.
real player in the market, then we can't continue to ignore it. And last but not least, because I'm a professor and because I've been associated with education for 30 years now, Ijaz, nothing will work unless we invest in our human capital, our youth, because they make up 70% of our population. Unless
Yeah,
we have our national security policy should be a youth policy. How will we
yeah,
turn them
I
into
agree.
an asset tomorrow?
I mean, the NSP talks about the citizen-centric approach and the rest of it, but I mean, I'm happy you talked about education, and I would also say the health sector. I mean, with
Yes.
knowledge economies require high level of human resource, which is also very healthy. And education, I always say this, as Ghalib said, uh, निगाह की हमने पैदा रिश्ता रब्ते अलाइक से. So the ability to connect dots, that's the essence of knowledge. On that note, Dr. Huma Baqai, thank you so much.
Thank you,
We're
Dr.
likely to circle back because the last program that I want to do in this series is something where I want to have Moeed Yusuf along with two other scholars. So I'm going to bother you once again for that.
I'd love
But
to.
yeah, thank you so much for this
Anytime.
episode.
Lovely talking to you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.